welcome back to the latest episode of the Master None podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Murphy. We're doing some NBA chat tonight, no rugby like the last few weeks, but we've got our good friend Jonny Byrne back from Atlantic Sports podcast. Thanks again for joining us, Jonny. We talked obviously a bit a while ago about the first kind of playoff round, kind of giving our previews. We're around in now, so we've seen some good stuff, some bad stuff, so we've got a lot to kind of get tucked into. But first of all, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Stephen. I know we'd said before we kind of previewed the playoffs that we'd chat maybe once the first round was done, and you know it's mad how quickly these playoffs have gone because nearly this Eastern and Western Conference semi-finals are nearly over. Some of the series have already finished, so time is escaping us, I think.
I know Miami have a serious advantage. Like they're already in conference finals, just chilling, and like the Celtics and Raptors could go to 7, and it's a serious advantage for them. But they seem to be the Eastern Conference have seemed to got a good few days head start on the Western Conference. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but interesting to see how that kind of pans out. But yeah, look, what we'll do is we'll go over round one, kind of hit a few points that we thought I think everyone would say it was noteworthy. And then we'll get it sort of into the current second round and see how we get on. So we'll start in the West. Obviously, first round, we saw the Lakers beating the Blazers 4-1. We thought, I'm pretty sure our predictions, I think I said 6, Lakers in 6. I can't remember what you said, Jonny. But I think the Lakers or the Blazers sort of just kind of run out of steam towards it. I think they had a very tough bubble. They were, playoff games as soon as they got in there, but pretty much compared to the Lakers. And they just looked a bit tired come, I think, that game 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, I think as well I think I might have had them in 5 or 6, and I think I expected them to kind of do well at the start, but then the Lakers to run away towards the end because they obviously, had the kind of tough run of the end of the regular season to try and even qualify for the playoffs. And obviously, once they qualified, it was nearly as if they just had to start a new battle after that, which was a lot to ask of them after nearly playing playoff-esque games in the regular season. But I think they just got hampered with injuries. Damian Lillard was out for at least a game or two towards the end of the series. Defensively, they were just really kind of left open because when you're relying on the likes of Carmelo Anthony and Hassan Whiteside to guard LeBron and Anthony Davis, I think you're talking trouble there. So unfortunately, defensively, just weren't able to match them.
Yeah, I think you're right. But a lot of positives to be taken from the Blazers there, as your nucleus of McCollum, Lillard, and Nurkic. That's a good nucleus to have. I know they're in a tough Western Division or conference, but like Nurkic really, really impressed me. From bubble and playoffs, I thought he was absolutely brilliant, and like seems to really enjoy a good competitive fight. And obviously, we know how good Lillard is and McCollum late in the game. And McCollum was carrying a back injury. Apparently, by all accounts, had broken his back in some area, which sounds like that's going to keep you out for a couple of games, but it didn't, amazingly enough. Lakers again, sort of, in some parts, kind of going through the motions here. Like they sort of sometimes they do that. The only person in the playoffs who might have that switch is LeBron. He can turn it on and off, but it's whether the rest of his team has or not. But we'll get on to them later on. Rockets versus OKC in the first round, 7-game kind of thriller. I think, I would imagine most neutrals wanted OKC to win this just because of the storylines. You have CP3 kind of against his old team and sort of David versus Goliath in a lot of ways. But Rockets came out good in the game 7. But I was absolutely gutted for the Thunder just because, CP3 was as good as I've seen him in a long, long time. He was, CP3's always kind of been a little bit baby fattish, never been like ripped or anything like that. But he looked in really good lean condition. He was hitting some major clutch shots at the end of games, running the offense, good nucleus of young players around him, and it seemed to really, really click for them, which was great. Thunder then, unfortunately, just kind of had too much in the end. Obviously, missing Westbrook for the first 2 games hampered the Rockets. And Harden, I don't know, as I said before, I'm not a big fan of Harden, but he came in and out of games a lot, but at the end, he ends up coming up with a big block on Luguentz Dort, who has really emerged in the series as I don't want to say a potential superstar, but he was definitely an incredible role player and defensively locked in on Harden a lot, which is going to get you paid a lot in this league. So what were your kind of thoughts on this series? Obviously, I don't know, what was your predictions for that one? I can't remember.
I think we both had OKC in 7.
Okay.
As far as I'm nowhere. And unfortunately, we're a game off, or how it
Yeah.
ended. But it wasn't a surprise as the series went on that it was kind of swiveling towards the Rockets, because obviously Westbrook was missing for the first couple of games, and having him back, adds a bit of a threat, I guess, on offense. And the Thunder, sometimes it looked like they had it all. It looked like Chris Paul, the kind of floor general, was controlling the narrative of the games. But then there were some games where he didn't shoot well, or he didn't, come up with much points on the offensive end. But as you mentioned, Luguentz Dort kind of emerging from this series as, relatively, unknown personality before the bubble, and now obviously will be highly sought after. And even defensively, he did a great job on James Harden, and that was kind of his primary role. But in Game 7, he was the go-to man when it came to the offense, putting up 30 points. And almost, if he had sank that final 3 in Game 7, that would have really put his name on the map, I think. But, of course, Harden came in for the block. So,
I know.
not much to add there, to be honest.
Yeah.
Just, pity for the Thunder, but they've a lot to look forward to, as you mentioned, with the young core of Gilgeous-Alexander, Dort, and Darius Bazley off the bench as well. They'll be hoping for maybe a better run next year.
Well, they have a dilemma with CP3, unfortunately, because we know how good he is, but he is, I think, due to make 41 million next year, and then the next year after that, 44 million, which is ridiculous numbers. So I don't know if it obviously was good. It worked this year, but for that price, you really need to be contending. So I don't know. They might look. I've seen already some rumors of him to the Bucks, so that could be interesting with Giannis and CP3. But we'll move on. And again, the kind of last first round match in round 1 in the West was, of course, Clippers versus Dallas, which was an incredibly entertaining series as well. In our preview podcast, I was very high on Luka Doncic, and he really showed up in the series. It was just incredible. Like for the series, he averaged 31 points, 9 assists, and 10 rebounds. So 1 assist off, averaging pretty much a triple double. Game 4 obviously was his highlight. 43 points, 17 rebounds, 13 assists, and the game winner in overtime. Which, as I was saying to you before, I watched that live. I was sitting here with my girlfriend, and we watched that game, and I actually was giving out about him hitting so many step back threes, because it's not like a good percentage shot. I don't care who you are. It's not a good percentage shot, especially when you do it as often as he does. But, the final play of the game, we know who to get in the ball, and he just gets it, steps back. And he's just incredible for someone so young. The issue now with the Dallas Mavericks team is Porzingis, when he's healthy, it works. It's very dynamic. It's very, wins a lot of games. But can you keep him healthy for a full season, for a full playoffs? The answer so far in his career is no. And that's obviously disappointing. And you need someone like Luka is world class. You need someone there to be his Robin to his Batman, basically, which is a Porzingis. I hope it is, because Porzingis adds an incredible amount of versatility. But can you keep him on the floor, basically? What did you think when you saw the series?
Well, I mean, credit to you, Stephen, for this, because I was a bit of a Luka and Mavericks hater coming into the series. I don't think I predicted them to do as well as they did. And to be honest, if they were able to stay healthy, because Doncic went off in games with injuries, Porzingis obviously missing a chunk of the series towards the end. And obviously, I think it was a game 1 where there was that ridiculous flagrant foul on Porzingis as well. So they just had a lot of bad luck. And if luck had been on their way, they got 2 games despite, all that happening against them. So honestly, credit to you, Stephen, for buying into them, because the stock has risen after this series.
Oh my God, yeah. He's not sneaking up on anyone anymore, unfortunately.
No, he's out there now, but no, my problem was always just the depth with the Mavericks, and if the likes of a Porzingis or a Doncic went down, who else are they relying on? And unfortunately, that was the case. They didn't really have the players there to really step up to face the Kawhis and Paul Georges. And we know how deep the Clippers are, and how many players they can run on any given night. So, 4-2, and an interesting series for the Clippers, I guess, not as invincible as a lot of people think they are.
Yeah, I will say, I know people will say I'm very biased towards the Mavericks and Luka, but it was very lucky that Paul George absolutely stunk the first 3 or 4 games of this series. So that did help. But yeah, obviously not having Porzingis for the last 2 games wasn't easy either. But look at the Clip or the Mavs are in a good situation. They have a very young superstar, and Porzingis is still young. If you can get Porzingis healthy and get a couple of more role players around him, around that core, then it's only going to be positive things in the future. So let's just hope that they both stay healthy. Because if I want a world where Luka is just rampaging in the NBA, because he is so exciting to watch. Okay, enough Luka talk. I'm sorry, everyone listening. We'll go over to the East. The East was the total opposite of the West. Total kind of whitewash. We had basically 3 sweeps and a 4-1 win for the Bucks. So we'll glance through this pretty quickly. But the Bucks beating Orlando 4-1. Orlando taking the first game, which I think shocked a lot of people. And imagine that was a lot, probably just due to the Bucks kind of been like, okay, we're actually in the playoffs here. We need to start playing. I think as well, I don't think we took into account enough in our preview of the fact that there is no home court advantage. I think that's why we saw a couple of upsets in a few games. I think is due to that, because there's no intimidating atmosphere. There's no crowds 2 feet from you shouting at you when you're trying to hit a shot. So I think that's what kind of helped the Orlando Magic. Decent enough team. Aaron Gordon played pretty well, but Bucks then winning 4 on the trot. Anything you want to add to that kind of series?
Not really, just the fact
Yeah.
that Aaron Gordon went off injured towards the end of the series, and obviously then the writing was on the wall. So no, a nice warm up for the Bucks.
Yeah. Miami sweep. We didn't even talk about Denver, Utah in the West. Apologies. We're going to go back and talk Denver, Utah, because that was a 7-game thriller as well. Apologies to everyone listening. It became the Murray versus Mitchell show, basically, which was incredible, and no one sort of. Well, we all knew Mitchell and Murray were good, but not this level good. I think Murray had 50 points twice in like the space of 3 games. But we'll talk about Murray. So we've seen sort of spurts from players like this before. TJ Warren obviously being one of the recent ones there in the bubble, and has since in the Miami series totally cooled down. Is this who Murray is, or is this a kind of a flash in the pan? What do you think?
It's kind of almost feels like there's a regular season Murray and a kind of playoff, because I feel like last year we even saw glimpses of how well he can be offensively, and even sometimes during the regular season he can put up 30-40 points on any given night, but it is quite rare. But for him to do it, I guess, kind of back to back in a way in this series was really, really impressive. And even watching some of those games down the stretch where Jamal Murray would get the ball, bring it down the court, shoot a 3. Then Donovan Mitchell would get the ball, bring it down the court. It was just an absolute duel between the 2 young guards, which I think is, great to see in terms of the future of the league. So I don't know. I'd be more probably erring on the side of that he can be one of these kind of big time shooters and big time players for the Nuggets. I'll give him a bit of credit, because I feel like not a lot of people are buying into the Jamal Murray stock. How do you feel about him?
I'll need to see it a bit more, obviously.
Yeah.
Just because we've seen it before. Like remember Lynn Sanity. These things do kind of happen for a while, unfortunately. But I will need to see sort of kind of more consistency. But he was incredible. He was incredible in that series, and so was Mitchell. They were just amazing. But I thought Porter Jr. really kind of showed what he is capable of, which is being like, he's obviously an amazing athlete. He's got a pretty good shooter's touch, but much room to improve in every aspect, which is always good. Defensively, he definitely was targeted, and I think he admitted that himself in an interview. He was like, "Yeah, I'd target me too." He's a rookie, so again, room to improve in that sense as well. So he, if he becomes kind of the star he's got a pretty good, three-man game there. Utah are good, but is having your 2 best players, Mitchell and Gobert, is it good enough in that Western Conference? At the moment, I don't think it is, which is kind of an awkward situation to be in, because you're not bad by any means, but you're not title contenders either. So that's kind of what do you think about the Mitchell and Gobert combo?
Yeah, I mean, I think they really missed Bojan, but have spaced the floor a little bit for them, and who, the year before last for the Pacers was almost their number 1 option once Victor Oladipo went out. So, he would have been a really important player in that series, but would he have been enough? Serious questions I think about Mike Conley and the money they're giving him. I think he's kind of past his prime in terms of being, the first or second option on a team. So I don't know. It's a good duo, definitely in terms of offense, defense, but no, definitely not in the West to go deep in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think so too. I want to add just as well. It was amazing. All the games, the first 6 games were all well into the 100 points. Shootouts, and then the last game, Game 7, a lot of Game 7, first Game 7s for probably a lot of players in the series, 80 points to 78. It's just sort of like, oh shit, we're in a really intense basketball game here,
Yeah.
and the shooting arm sort of tightens up. But obviously, yeah, Denver moving on in an amazing series, so credit to them. But okay, we'll go back to the East now. Miami sweeping the Pacers 4-0. I think we both expected this to be a bit more competitive than it was, but was sort of foreshadowing how good this Miami Heat team actually are as a unit. Pacers really never got going. Again, Oladipo only coming back from a long injury, so he was never going to be the same player that he was yet. I'm sure he will. TJ Warren, as I said before, totally cooled off compared to what he was in the last few regular season games. And Miami, just a solid, good team. Like Jimmy Butler, obviously, is their star. And late game, they turn to him a lot, which is understandable. But, you always see these stats with Miami Heat, 5 starters and, double-digit scoring. And it's very hard to defend against that because you don't know who is. Obviously, late game is probably going to be Butler, but you still have to watch out for Tyler Hero. You still have to watch out for Jay Crowder, who's hitting these shots that, not always goes down. Duncan Robertson, you still have other threats that you have to watch out. And Butler is, but he's the alpha dog of this team, don't get me wrong, but he's willing to pass the ball if he has to. And he seems to really believe in this team. He seems to, we've seen him implode other teams before when he doesn't respect his teammates, but that doesn't seem to be the case here in Miami. And it's working out very well. So this Miami team, what kind of, were you expecting this from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd said it on the last podcast. I was buying into the Miami Heat stock, and I'm kind of glad I did because from the games I watched from them in the bubble, I thought they were the best team in Orlando going into the playoffs. I just felt like they were the most complete. They were playing as a unit, really, really well, and the depth and the 3-point shooting and just how well coached they were. It was evident going into the playoffs. And I think as you said, we both expected the Pacers to put up a bit more of a fight here. That's not what happened, and we know what the Heat have done down the stretch in the next round. So I'll probably hold off my Heat kind of glory talk until we talk about the Bucks. But look, very impressive, and shout out to TJ Warren, who might be a bit of a flash in the pan, as you mentioned.
TJ Warren beef, love it.
Yeah.
Move on to Celtics Sixers. Obviously, this series was sort of disappointing even from the get-go because obviously Simmons was out injured, but Celtics just, again, similar to Miami Heat in a lot of ways, a really good, solid team where no one is really the star. Obviously, you have Tatum and Brown and Kemba Walker, but very much ball is shared around, and those teams are tough to defend against in the playoffs. But we have to talk about the Sixers. You need, in my opinion, this needs to be blown up. You need to trade either Embiid or Simmons. I don't really care which one, but it's not working, and it has not worked for quite a while now. I don't like Embiid's attitude. I don't like the fact that he's tweeting so much now when they're out and saying basically how much he loves Jimmy Butler. And I wouldn't like that if I was a GM of a team personally. I'm not saying you should trade him. He's obviously a fantastic player. I think he's a better player than Simmons is, but it's not working, and you need to do something. Do you agree?
I do, and to be honest, the big problem here is, and I'm going to completely shit on the 76ers because I thought they were absolutely disgraceful. Considering the money they spent in the offseason, considering the talent they have at their disposal, and, I will cut them some slack in that Ben Simmons was missing. And as a Celtics fan, I've watched a lot of 76ers Celtics games. They're kind of what I would call the kind of one of the more heated rivalries in the East. And whenever I had watched, I think it could have been maybe their second meeting this regular season, Simmons just controlled the narrative of the game. He just was able to run rampant on the Celtics. So I really think he was an asset they really missed in this series in particular. But the real problem going down the stretch here is the money they have tied to Al Horford and Tobias Harris, who are two of the more, arguably two of the more terrible contracts in the league after this series. Tobias Harris was awful, just a kind of, volume shooter that put up, kind of baseless statistics. Al Horford towards the end of the series was getting a bit more into it, but Al Horford spent several seasons at the Celtics. This should be a series that he gets up for and plays his best basketball. And to be honest, I think a lot of this stemmed from the way this team was coached, and I was pretty happy to see Brett Brown get his walking papers after this series, because you could clearly see that there was no direction with this team whatsoever, especially with such a talent like Joel Embiid to go 4-0 to a Celtics team that I think is very good, but definitely beatable in one or two games at least. So, look, I thought the 76ers were absolutely crap. And yeah, I think you do have to blow it up. And I'd probably get rid of Embiid if I had to choose.
Okay. Well, the irony in all this is that the Sixers tanked for so many years so that they wouldn't become this sort of, team that is not really contending and not crap at the same time. And that's exactly what they've become in the East. So what did they just start again, blow it up, start tanking again until you get it right? It's not easy being a GM, don't get me wrong, but the process, as it's been titled, it hasn't worked, and it's I don't know what the next steps are. We look at the argument for trading Simmons. Obviously, as I said, actually doesn't look that good, because we saw 4 games with an Embiid-led team, and they look crap. So maybe you're right. Maybe they should have traded Embiid. I think his attitude, as I said, needs to be really worked on. He is still young, don't get me wrong, and his talent is incredible, but he's obviously not happy there. So I don't know what they have to do, but they need to do something again, because at the moment they're sort of in no man's land. And as you say, paying players a lot of money. And that's not what you want to be in the NBA. You don't want that situation because you're going to go nowhere fast. So, yeah, not good listening for Sixers fans, so apologies. We'll move on to Raptors Nets. Again, not much to say about this, but I have to say I was impressed by the Nets. I've seen a few of these games. The Nets were really good for 3.5 quarters, and then when it gets to sort of crunch time, they just kind of looked like the inexperienced team they are, and just sort of ended up forcing things when it didn't need to be forced, or stopped doing things that they were doing really well. But all I could keep thinking as watching this team was like, imagine if this team had Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. That's kind of scary. If I was the rest of the East, I would not be excited about this. I think they're immediate contenders next year if both them guys are healthy. If Kyrie is actually playing or not, we don't. Obviously, it's still very much up in the air. But they are well coached, well drilled. I think just the inexperience of being in the playoffs for a while really hampered them. And they obviously come up against an incredibly well drilled team in the Raptors that know what they're doing and are defending champions. So, but did you agree? Did you like a lot what you saw with the Nets?
Yeah, no, just credit to them. Not much to say other than, they really exceeded all of our expectations with being left off the court in terms of, competitiveness with the roster that they had. But credit to them and credit to that coach that they had. Unfortunately, Steve Nash will be coming in and taking his role, but I hope they keep him around. I'm not sure if they've maybe given him an assistant role or something, but I'd like to see him being kept around in this bubble.
Yeah, it's strange. Steve Nash obviously getting that title, being relatively inexperienced, but I think I tweeted at the time, Kevin Durant obviously has big time for Steve Nash with his time with him at the Warriors. Nash was there for the last couple of years, being like an assistant. So I think Durant obviously made a big. That was kind of. I'm sure he had a lot of input in that decision being made. But I like Steve Nash. I don't see why that won't work. Obviously, being a rookie coach is never easy, but we'll see. He's going to have quite the nucleus of players to pick from there. So hopefully, it all goes well for them. We'll head in the second round, obviously, and we'll start off sort of what the main talking point is, and that is Giannis and the Bucks. So I'll let you kick off. Obviously, if you want to do some Miami gloating, this is your time. You go ahead, sir.
Look, I might start off some of my talk with I've delved into the statistical books, and I've come up with a couple of stats that might be of intrigue. So on the Heat's end of things, I think you mentioned it earlier, Jay Crowder, and how he has been a kind of formidable force in this series. and in the playoffs in general. And he has shot 21 threes, or he's made 21 threes at a clip of 43%, which I think is, crazy for a kind of veteran like Crowder, who has kind of been a journeyman between teams, and now defensively is a presence, and also on the 3-point line is a presence. So he has been really good in this series. And then I guess there's two other things on the Heat end of things for me. Tyler Hero in game 4 and 5 kind of taken over for the Heat offensively, which is mad to think he was the youngest player on the court between both teams, and kept the Heat in it and forced an overtime in game 4, and then kind of pulled the Heat away in game 5 to really seal off the series, I guess. So that was just, and then Goran Dragic being the kind of second offensive option on the team as well, when he's kind of, a sixth, seventh man in the rotation. I think he averaged 5 assists, 4 rebounds this series. Him is 30 years of age, is great to see. So he just have the make the Grizzlies baggage. I don't know if Butler in as another one that comes to mind, and then the young kind of presence of the likes
Johnny,
of Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson.
Sorry, you're skipping a lot there. Yeah. Do you mind turning off your video maybe, and then it might free up some bandwidth for yourself. And then, if
of course,
will
I start from the start?
Start from your Dragic point.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. And then, as I guess as well, the kind of third, or then I guess as well, the second offensive option going in Goran Dragic with 20 points a game, 5 assists and 4 rebounds for somebody that's nearly 34 or 35. To be getting the best out of him as well. It just seems like the Heat had the perfect mix of your Grizzly veterans in Crowder and Iguodala, in Goran Dragic, and then the youth in Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson. It just seemed like just a real solid unit. And a lot of people obviously, didn't expect the Bucks to be ran over. But when you look to Chris Middleton as your top kind of offensive option to kind of turn the tides of a game, that's when you should start to worry, because I think this series was over as soon as Giannas went out injured in, I think it was game 4. And yeah, look, it's really just
it was
such
over
a
even before that. They just
Yeah.
they looked out of their depth completely. And
Sure.
I think you make a good point with Chris Middleton. And actually, I was listening to Bill Simmons, and he said this as well. He says Giannis is basically a center, as in like how he plays and his size. And no big center has ever won basically a title on their own. They've always had a second guy who is a shot creator, like your Shaq, your Kobe, and that you need that kind of person, because unfortunately we've seen this now with Giannis in the Bucks for the last 2 years. He's stoppable when it comes to the playoffs, and he only seems to have that one sort of attacking point, which is I'm going downhill. If I get past you, I'm dunking it. Do you know what I mean? Or my size alone is going to let me get to this basket pretty easily. And it works in the regular season, but when a team actually has a series to prepare for you and stop that one skill, you need then to look at your second, your third option. The problem with a team like the Bucks, who is so heavily dependent on your Giannis's and even Chris Middleton, is your third, your fourth, and your fifth guy who've been standing around most of the season in the corner waiting for dish-offs. You're then asking them to start creating their own shots. You're then asking them to sort of, but when Giannis gets stopped and kicks it out to, say, Kyle Korver, and he can't get a shot away, he doesn't know how to run an offense, from that moment. He's like, well, this doesn't happen in the regular season. Why are you asking me to do this now? So that's a challenge for the Bucks looking forward, especially for Giannis, is he needs to develop something else that he can do, or they need to build someone around. Middleton is fine. He's a very good player. Don't get me wrong. And in game 4, when they looked like they were getting swept, he stepped up and made some big buckets. But that is not going to win you playoff series, unfortunately. If Chris Middleton is your third option, then you're in an incredible position. But he's not for the Bucks. And unfortunately, after Middleton, it does seem to sort of drop off a bit. And by the looks of it, Giannis isn't going anywhere. He's denied. He said, basically come out and said, I'm not going to look for a trade. the Bucks will offer him an extension in the offseason, and it looks like it's going to be in the 5-year, 220 million, 220 million range, which is obviously incredible figures and way more than any other team can basically offer him due to Milwaukee having his rights. So I think he'll stay, but the Bucks will have to show him that they're going to kind of put the team around him. And they didn't last year when they traded Malcolm Brogdon to basically avoid the luxury tax. We've seen time and time again, NBA superstars don't like when their teams dodge taxes. It doesn't set the right precedent. It doesn't set the winning precedent. We look back years and years ago to OKC and the James Harden trade. That was obviously to avoid luxury tax as well. And look what happened to that franchise. They did successful, but they didn't win any trophies, which they should have. So it's a case of this Giannis see the next couple of years being fruitful with the Bucks, because obviously regular season they've been, I think the last 2 years they've been pretty much the best regular season team in the league, but twice now they've been stopped and bet by a lower seeded team in the playoffs, and rather comfortably both times. So that's not good. Sorry, I've been rambling on there, but that's basically my Bucks take. But what do you think? Giannis is going to go, or do you think he's going to stay?
I don't think the Bucks are going to trade him. I've heard some talk that maybe, because, there's a chance he could leave. Would the Bucks, roll the dice and try and get some sort of value for him? But I think it's nearly worth keeping someone like Giannis and roll the dice with him for a year than actually, trading him for his assets in case he leaves, because there's no surety of that. And I think, loyalty is a kind of forgotten thing in the NBA these days, especially you see it with Kawhi Leonard, who, if the Clippers win this year, they'll be, winning with 3 teams, this first ever player. I think that's one with 3 different title teams. And I think that's going to be more of the norm going on now, whereas Giannis kind of represents the loyalty factor of, drafted by a team, grew up in a city, and, kind of stays affiliated with them. So I would be surprised if he leaves. I don't think he would be the type to kind of go to LA or, one of the bigger markets. But you made a good point there. They really do have to put more players around them, invest more. If they have to go into the luxury tax, they have to take that risk, because ultimately what they have at the moment is not good enough. And, if he goes down injured, or if that happens again in a playoff series, they have to be ready, to be able to respond to that. And they weren't in this series.
Yeah, I think you make a good point with the loyalty as well. He's up there. There's very few lads I could think at the top of my head that would be that loyal. I think Damian Lillard is one. I think Giannis is one. And then after that, I don't know. I probably is more. I just can't think at the top of my head. But it's since LeBron left for Miami, it's become that sort of mindset of, which I don't know if it's right or I don't know if it's wrong, because at the same time people preach loyalty to these teams, but an NBA owner will trade a player like that if it makes sense. You know what I mean? So it's tough. It's tough to know how to go with it. But I think you're right. I don't think they need to trade him. Obviously, they run the risk then in a year if he leaves and they get nothing for him, which is obviously would be, the worst case scenario for the Bucks. But I think I think he stays. I think he signs. In a year or two, if it hasn't worked, you can still trade him then. With a couple of years left, some team's going to take Giannis. But if we look at the other side, obviously a couple of potential teams is the Heat. I think I've seen the Raptors going around, and I even seen some Warriors talk, which would just be typical of the Warriors to go and snatch Giannis and add that to the nucleus of their team. I'm intrigued by the Heat taking him. Obviously, wouldn't look well after basically being beaten 4-1 to join that team. We look at another Kevin Durant situation, obviously, but that would be an incredible fit. Raptors also would be an incredible fit. You're adding a superstar to an already amazing team. Would you rather see him go to the Heat or the Raptors?
Yeah, this is the thing. Like, in turn, Giannis,
Yeah,
the Heat or the Raptors? Oh, Jesus. Probably the Raptors, just because I think they're a bit more likable, and I think the Heat have enough assets as it is in terms of your younger players, and it would actually make me sick if they went to the Heat. But my answer would be the Celtics. I think he should go to the Celtics.
Okay, I like that.
I think he's going to stay. I'm not entertaining any Giannis trade rumors or or the likes. I genuinely think he will stay, and until there's any sort of report or inkling that he will leave, then I'll start the conversation. But I think honestly, he holds the torch of loyalty in the NBA now, and if he passes that on and goes to another team, I think that could have an adverse effect on the league for the next 10 years. I really think it's that important if he stays or not. So we'll see.
And by all accounts, he is like a really, really great lad. Do you know what I mean? Sound out, and like he, when the Bucks, apparently when they were talking about protesting that game, there was some ifs and buts, and he came in and he was like, "No, we're protesting this game, we're boycotting it,"
Sure.
which again leads to the talk of he doesn't value winning as much as he does doing the right thing, which I don't think can be said for a lot of other players, and I'm including LeBron in that because um, well, we can get into that at a different time, but I think Giannis basically is that kind of player who would stay. And not look, it's very lucrative for him to stay. 220 million over 5 years is not a bad deal by any extent. So, um, it's a win-win for kind of Giannis in that sense. But we'll see. I think you're right. I don't think he leaves. Obviously, the Heat through to the conference finals for the first time since the LeBron era, and I don't know. I wouldn't back against them. I have only lost one game so far, so winning's a habit. So we'll see. But who are they going to face? Is it going to be Boston, Toronto? So obviously Boston 3-2 up at the moment. You're a Celtics fan, obviously going 2-0 up pretty early. Did you think that it was game over, or were you still fearful of the Raptors?
I've watched a couple of the games now, or all the games actually. Being a Celtics fan, some of the games you kind of dabble in and out, but obviously when you're a diehard fan, you like to cover or watch and support every game. But what I've seen from these games is that Toronto have won two games, and one of those games was finished with a kind of luck of the draw OG Anunoby 3-pointer, and the three games that Boston have won were not that close. So I really would be surprised if this goes to 7. I think it's Boston's there for the taking. But a couple of things in this series. Really surprised with how terrible Pascal Siakam has been. Really not the all-star level player that we expected, averaging 15 points per game. You really expect a lot from him, and you expect a lot from Kyle Lowry as well. And both of them are shooting less than 25% from three, which is pretty disappointing if you're a Toronto fan. And then on the flip side, I've been really impressed with some of the rim protection from Boston. Daniel Tice, Robert Williams coming in off the bench has put in really good minutes, which is good to see. It's kind of worrying for Toronto again that Jason Tatum is out rebounding every single Toronto player, including Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka. I think Marc Gasol is 1 year away from retirement, and I think Ibaka is having a great series, and it's actually one of their better 3-point shooters. But that's the thing. I think it's a lot of it. The commentators have mentioned it during the game. A lot of this series goes down to being shooting the best. And the games that Boston have lost, they haven't shot well from three. And in general, in the series, Toronto haven't shot well from three. They've been over-relying on, a few lucky 3-pointers from Serge Ibaka and over-relying on the kind of volume 3-point shooting of Fred VanVleet. So, it's not good, I guess, for Toronto. I think they're on tender hooks now, and I'd be really surprised to see it go 7 games.
Yeah, I think you're right. And by Serge Ibaka, as you mentioned, is questionable for
Yes.
Game 6. So he's in a walking boot. But I've seen reports that his teammates expect him to play. But even if he does play and he's not 100%, I think that's the damning of Toronto, because he is should in this series especially become very important. But I've seen some interesting stats kind of with the Celtics. So when Kemba Walker basically is on the floor, there are 9 points per 100 possessions better than when he isn't on the floor. So that shows you kind of how important he's become for that team.
Yeah.
So basically just keep him out for 48 minutes and you'll win. Simple as. No, it's obviously not that simple, but I think Boston I think they just have too much. They're two solid teams, but when you look at them on paper, Boston have the more superstar. Like Tatum is a star. Brown is obviously a star in his own right. You still have Kemba. You still have these kind of players that just are just a little bit better than what Toronto offers. By no means Toronto are not a bad team, and this has been a very good defense of their title considering who they lost last year, and no one really gave them a hope to even be competitive. So I think you make a good point though. Yeah, like your two kind of stars of Lowry and Siakam just haven't sort of played well, which I think is a credit to Celtics defense because you have a lot of long lads in that team, and their defense can be smothering. I think that's what's happened with Toronto at the moment. They're not being played well, rather than just not playing well. But I think you're right. Unless Kyle Lowry or Siakam goes off in Game 6 and puts up big numbers, I think this is going to be 4-2 to the Celtics. Um, Celtics versus Heat then in the conference finals, which is interesting. I like that. I like that matchup. I think that should be a good tight game, but we'll see. You never know. I'm not counting out the champions yet. And, I always say you have to respect the champions until they're officially out. So we'll see. We'll go over to the Western Conference now, and obviously Lakers playing the Rockets now. Rockets kind of took Game 1. I don't know if that was the case, if they were just still kind of in the flow from Game 7 against OKC, and the Lakers had a few days off. I'm not sure, but took Game 1. Lakers have taken both games since. The Lakers seem to, well, I know in Game 2 and 3, got out to sort of decent leads, and by halftime are up and kind of big. But the Rockets, they're very similar to the Rockets, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, but very similar to the Golden State Warriors, as in you need to be literally 30 points up, or else they can still get back in the game just because they shoot so many trees. Do you know what I mean? Like with the Warriors, you'd have to literally be 30 or 40 points up, or else you're like, Steph could hit 5 trees here and they're back in this game with all the momentum, and it's just ridiculous. So I don't know. Do you think, am I right or am I wrong with that?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, when you're looking, this is probably the series that I've probably looked at the least, because I just feel like the Lakers are going to push this out at any point. And I think the Rockets, looking at the stats, have actually been shooting well from the 3-point line. 35%, most of their core guys have been shooting, which has been really good. But I just feel like there's just a bit more star power and a bit more kind of playoff resume in the Lakers lineup. And I'm telling you, the big thing for me here, looking at especially the last game, is playoff Rondo is back.
He is. He is. For him, one night only maybe, but he's back.
Yeah. And playoff Rondo is averaging 13 points a game, 7 assists, and shooting 40% from 3 points, which is brilliant for him. So, he has teamed up with Anthony Davis and went on a playoff run before. So he's obviously familiar with that setup, but he is, a force to be reckoned with, playoff Rondo. And I've seen it as a Celtics fan when he was playing with the Bulls, even, this is going back 3 or 4 years. Also jumping out on the stats here in this series is the rim protection and the lack of rim protection from Houston, obviously without running a viable center in their starting lineup. And on the other end is how LeBron has had so much success with his chase down blocks, because he is averaging 2.7 blocks per game in this series, which is above the league leader in blocks per game during the regular season. So that shows to show how well he has been around the rim. So look, overall this series, I think I'm expecting probably Lakers in 6. Houston could sneak one more game, but overall there's just it just seems like the Lakers are on a level above Houston, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right as well. And I think another stat to kind of look out for is the Lakers. LeBron and AD is going to get you what they're going to get you. You know what I mean? They're going to combine for 60 points probably every game, in around that mark. It's the bench kind of with the Lakers. If they perform well, I don't think that they lose. I don't think they lose to anyone. But if they're like we've seen in the first kind of in the last few regular season games, I remember I think only 2 guys on the bench average, were getting more than 10 points a game. Which is not going to be good enough, unfortunately, when it comes to this sort of thing. But I think it was Game 2, the Lakers bench outscored the Houston bench 41 points 13. When you have a 30-point deficit in your bench, plus LeBron and AD getting you 60, that's you're going to win pretty much every game you play. I think as well, once they score over 100 points in a game, they have like a 98% winning record. Do you know what I mean? So they're an incredibly high ceiling team, the Lakers, but they do need a few things to go right. And credit to PJ Tucker, he has been, doing incredibly well at the center position for his size. And Anthony Davis sometimes does struggle with him, as does LeBron, which is amazing. But over a full series, that's going to be tough. Unfortunately, I think you're right. I think, look at the Rockets could go out and shoot 40 feckin' 3-pointers, you know what I mean? And then just, kill you that way. It's what they live and die by. So some days it does come off and some days it works, but Westbrook has been ice cold this series. And typical Westbrook isn't stopping shooting. He still will shoot the rock, even if it's not going well. Which I respect, but it must be incredibly frustrating as a Rockets fan when he does it. But we'll see. I think the Lakers have too much. I don't particularly want to see. I'm not a Rockets fan. I'm not a big fan of the way they play the game, so I don't particularly want to see them to win this game. And part of me does want to see the Lakers win the whole thing out because I just want to see the LeBron and Jordan discussions. If he wins another one, it'll be. It's like the gif of your man eating the popcorn, kind of just waiting. It's literally that's what it will be like because it'll just
Skip
be so
Bayless
much.
and the likes, yeah.
Oh man, he's so I just can't like. I follow him on Twitter, but do you ever hate follow someone? Do you know
Yeah.
So you can just get pissed off with their tweets. But he's on Twitter today, basically saying like Rondo was the most important player in that court last night and was the best player on the court as well. And it's like, all right, like he played really well, but like, come on, just like he just
didn't play any defense, so there you go.
No, but with Rondo, on your Rondo point though, he has he's a better. Well, I don't know. I think he's very similar to Patrick Beverley. Is that a crazy thing to say, or is a similar sort of role? As in, he's the antagonist.
Sure.
He'll get in Harden's face. He'll poke the ball out and just not make life too comfortable for the Westbrooks and the Hardens, which is what you want. You don't want your star players doing that. You want, Rondo does it. I think he had 5 steals in game 3, which is just incredible, and shot some 3-pointers. And my God, if he gives you that every game, then you're right. Playoff Rondo is officially back. But again, we've seen this come and go as quick as very quickly. So we'll see. We'll move on to the last sort of series we have. Obviously, the Clippers, after beating my beloved Mavs, are now leading Denver 2-1. First game was a blowout. I think Denver may have had a game 7 kind of hangover. Not actually a hangover, but I mean as in just exhausted and mentally drained from an incredible series with Utah. Clippers played well, but credit to Denver, come back. Murray again has been good. I think Jokic has been incredible. He just seems to hit these shots that are, when you look at them, when you look at them shooting it, you're like, that's not going in, and they just seem to drop in like weird body positions, and it's like, I think what people call an old man game where he just kind of just throws it up and it goes in. So in credit to him, he's been amazing. Kawhi and PG though have kind of been like, Paul George is back playing good stuff and Kawhi's back playing good stuff. He had a stinker in game 2. He went 4 from 17 from the field, which isn't happening very often for Kawhi. So the Nuggets should have won that game, and they did. And then last night, I caught the last quarter of this game, the game 3, and Nuggets looked a better team up until about 4 minutes to go, and then Clippers just sort of upped the pressure a little bit. And the rotations on defense and their closeouts were just a little bit more crisp, a little bit more pressurized, and the Nuggets didn't look like they knew what to do with it, and they couldn't handle it. And then Kawhi and Paul George made some big shots, and Beverly made some big plays, and then it's game over then. Do you know what I mean? They have that gear. They can't seem to do it for a full game. It does seem to come and go, which is not... I wouldn't love that if I was a Clippers fan, but it is there in them. Do you give Denver much hope in this, or is it going to be Clippers sort of in 6 and 7?
I would be surprised, but considering what we've seen from the Mavericks, and this is not me throwing shade at the Mavericks, but like,
I hope not, Johnny. I hope not.
It just shows that the Clippers are beatable, is all I'm saying. And for them to take a game from them, and watching that game, it seems to me, you mentioned there Jokic having a really big series, and you're right in saying that, because it seems like he is an absolute mismatch there for Zubac. And Duke has been, really stepped up since the Clippers came to the bubble. He's really become more than kind of the kind of thin European center that come off the bench for the Lakers before they traded him. He's really kind of found his role here for this Clippers team. But he's no match for Nikola Jokic and what he's like offensively. So that's a problem that the Clippers will have to address. A couple of things on the stats sheet here, because I am, of course, drilling out the old stats. Paul George has been shooting really well from three. He's shooting 46%, which is great because you mentioned Stephen there in the last series how he went to sleep for a while, and that obviously was advantage Dallas. So that's good to see if you're a Clippers fan. And then I had mentioned in the last podcast how Gary Harris was very important defensively, and I think he still is, guarding some of the better Clipper players. But he is also shooting really well from three so far in this series, shooting actually 47%. So they'll hope that for that to keep up. But ultimately, it seems like Kawhi hasn't reached his full potential in this series. He's only averaging about 22 points per game, which, is decent numbers. But for Kawhi, you'd be expecting 30 plus, especially getting into this end of the playoffs. So you'd expect a step up from him. And I would expect a step up as well from Jamal Murray because, as you mentioned, this is a player that in the last series put up near 50 points in certain games. So, he's I think a stat that stood out for me with him, he was putting up 37% field goal percentage, which is pretty awful in terms of just high volume shooting and really low efficiency. So, they're the two factors for me, or there's a number of factors I guess I spoke about, but if they can address the mismatch, the Jokic kind of Zubac mismatch, and try and keep Jamal Murray a little bit less efficient and quiet, then it's Clippers will run away with this. And I probably expect Denver to take one more game, but probably 4-2 in my eyes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know if we touched on this the last podcast, but what do you think is of Kawhi as a leader?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. Like looking at some of the other teams, and like Jimmy Butler, for example, I find Kawhi takes a lot of mid-range shots that we know, if it was Carmelo Anthony or if it was somebody else that, prides themselves on this mid-level, we'd be slating them for it. But because it's Kawhi, not many people mention it. So, there is that in one sense. But as a leader, I mean, vocally, he's not somebody that we would recognize anyway off the court as being a huge presence, and not the most inspiring in terms of his words. I guess definitely in terms of his actions on the court. I mean, he's won finals MVPs, won championships, so there is that. But I don't know. I would imagine if he's what we see during the interviews and on the court, the kind of silent leadership wouldn't really work for me. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't see it. I think when I look at that Clippers team, I'm like, who is the leader of the team? And even
Yeah.
Paul George isn't overly like. Is it Patrick Beverly? Is it literally like down to that sort of stuff? Like Toronto last year, I no doubt about it, Kyle Lowry was leader of that team. Like Kawhi is your star, but when it comes to talking on the court, talking off the court, and huddles, that was Kyle Lowry. LeBron is by a mile the leader of his team and always has been. Kobe was always leader of his team. You have those vocal guys, and I think you need that. And don't get me wrong, Kawhi is arguably the best player in the game. But when things are gonna go and when things hit the fan, I don't know. Do his teammates look to him? They obviously don't look to him vocally, as you say. So it's a case if he goes in and makes a big shot, makes a defensive play, which he's very capable of. My God, he blocked Murray with one finger the other night, which was incredible. But if he doesn't make the big shot, if he doesn't make the big play, what happens? Does it fall apart? Is it a case where like the likes of Marcus or Morris and Beverly are doing all the talking? Which don't get me wrong, he's a polarizing player, but I'd love to have him on my team. If I was supporting the team, but I don't know. Kawhi just can. I don't know. It's impossible to tell. He's like no other player I've ever seen, in the sense that he just doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
Never has, never. Like there's a picture going around on the internet now, and he was obviously a kid, and he's like, I don't know what the context is, but he's got two girls beside him, and he's just sitting there looking. He's not even smiling. It's just like, what goes through his head? I don't know. We'll see. Like obviously, he's something's working for him. He's won a championship, and he's a great opportunity to win another one. But I think you're right in the sense. I think the Clippers win this series. I want to see a Clippers Lakers conference finals. I think everyone does. So I think we're going to get it too, which is great. And hopefully, unfortunately, those games are going to be 2:00 in the morning here, which is really annoying. But we'll get to see some good highlights and maybe stay up for one or two of them. Maybe call in sick the next day. You know what I'm saying, Johnny? You know what I'm saying?
Sure. It's worth it. It's worth it.
Yeah, I have to back off. But we'll see. That's how it wraps it up. We'll hopefully revisit this maybe next week as well if you're about, Johnny, and we'll see
Yeah, absolutely.
how it goes. But as always, good to chat to you, my friend. Good to chat to some hoops with you, and we'll do it again next week.
Perfect. Thanks, Stephen.
All right, man. Thanks for joining me. See you soon.